leadership is managing expectations.
Mm-hmm.
How do you manage people's expectations when you're a candidate while also selling yourself as the strongest candidate for the job?
This is a really important and good question, because when you're running for office, you don't want to attach to your policies all sorts of caveats about why it may or may not work. And yet, if you are to run for office, your language and your commitment in the policies that you adopt have to be straightforward and easy to grasp, simple. Sometimes simplicity is not what the problems that the world brings requires. So you do have to manage that. I think it's important to manage expectations by setting forth, especially when you're in office, steps to an ultimate goal, and celebrate each of those incremental steps along the way, even if they're not quite the goal itself. But you have to celebrate the victories of the incremental steps. For example, when I was elected, I'm a Democrat, and I had a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a Republican Supreme Court and a Republican Attorney General and a Republican Secretary of State. I was the only statewide elected Democrat in state government. So given that, I was not able to pull ahead with all of the things that I had said I was going to do in my 50-page campaign platform, because a lot of those would have been opposed by the folks in office. So I started by assessing what can I do as an executive, putting out plans, knowing that they're not going to get fully adopted, but they may get changed along the way, and celebrating, if I had to take a half a loaf, celebrating the half loaf and say, we're not quite there yet, but we're going to celebrate this step.
In your experience during your time as governor, how did you work, or did you work to overcome cynicism within your constituents who maybe thought the best years of Michigan were behind them?
The job of providing hope to people during a time of enormous contraction and anxiety is very challenging, because the experience of an individual person who may be out of work, and maybe their unemployment benefit has run out, and maybe now all they're living on is food stamps, or they've lost their home. Their personal reality is so stark to them that words of hope just ring hollow for them. And so you have to manage the language that you use, even temper the language. You hear President Obama doing this all the time, which is, we're glad for this piece of good news, but we've got a long way to go. Or, the fact that that we've created, 80,000 new private sector jobs last month is good news, but we cannot stop here. And so your language always has to be in that sort of frame. I made a very large mistake one year when I, in my State of the State address, right in the middle of all of this maelstrom of losses of jobs, and we were having budget deficits, and I was in a huge battle with the legislature, and I wanted to give people hope. And so I was describing the progress with specific facts and specific job providers who had come or who were growing, and I have them in the audience, and I'm pointing to them so people can see it. It's not just language. But then at the end of my little litany about what we were doing, I said, in 5 years, you'll be blown away by the strength and diversity of Michigan's economy. Now, you would think if I said in 5 years that I'm providing a little bit of that balance. I'm not saying we're there yet. But my opponent, because this was during an election year, took that little clip out of my State of the State address and I say, in 5 years, you'll be blown away, and used that clip and played it over and over and over again, with the underscored, blown away yet, with showing all of the job losses and the factories closing and all of that. So you have to be careful and not overpromise or not appear to be Pollyanna in light of what people are experiencing. But on the other hand, you cannot be dour and feed into the negative cynicism either. So I'm not sure I ever truly found that balance, but you have to give a dose of both hope and reality to be able to have people listen to you.
For yourself, you mentioned that you face extreme partisanship in Michigan, with you being the only state elected Democrat. But
my first term. Yeah.
For your first term.
Right.
And also, right now, in the current state of the world, it is common that blame for not accomplishing real change
drives me crazy.
can just be pushed to the other party. In light of this, how do you keep from becoming cynical about the progress that America can make?
Well, here, let me just say this. First of all, what drives me absolutely crazy is when people blame the president for not getting all sorts of great things done, when it's really some people in Congress, the Republicans, who took on the conservatives, not all the Republicans, but the conservatives who came for the purpose of blocking his agenda. And so the Tea Party members or whomever came for the purpose of blocking his agenda, and they've got enough votes, they're going to block his agenda. And so blaming the president for that is, of course, counterproductive and not accurate. Instead, we should be looking to the citizens and say, if you don't like what you're seeing in Washington, if you think that not enough progress is being made, then you need to put people in office who will work with the president to make those changes. Because otherwise, we will continue to have this gridlock. So I do believe in the power of citizens to be able to make change, and I think their frustration was readily expressed in 2010, November of 2010. But the frustration was expressed because they didn't want to stay where they were. They needed to move somewhere, and so they picked the next alternative. Unfortunately, now they're seeing that that alternative is not some place where they want to stay either. So hopefully they will move to a place which provides the president with a working majority.
The belief in citizens is how you maintain that.
For sure, and because I know, I just know the stories out there of individual people who have overcome really hard things. Today in class, I was reading the letter from, a guy who was 17 years in prison because of a drug charge, and I commuted his sentence. And he's going to college, and he's getting great grades, and he's a testament, I think, to what individuals can overcome, even in the most terrible of circumstances, if they put their mind to it. So, I think citizens, the individual stories give me enormous hope.
When you were governor, what way did you use to measure success or failure beyond just polling data? How did you incorporate feedback into your...
We were very data-driven, honestly, and so, for example, at every cabinet meeting, when my State of the State address was the plan for the state for the year, and every one of the initiatives that I articulated had measurables attached to it. So every cabinet member who was responsible for that particular item, whose department, held the ball for that item, would have to come to the cabinet meetings, which I held twice a month, and stand up and report on where they were on the progress toward getting that particular goal finished. And so we had an online tool that measured where we were going, and at every cabinet meeting there was reporting out of where we were, and that enabled us to celebrate the successes. And even though I had such opposition in the legislature, ended up getting 80% of the items that I articulated in my various states of the state addresses done, because we held everybody's feet to the fire in moving the ball forward.
And that data was all available online for anyone to see?
Yep.
And my last question is how you define leadership, or what you look for in a leader.
One, somebody who has a real core, who has core values, who has a touchstone, no matter what the decision that's presented to them, they've got something that they turn to. For me, for example, I'm a person of faith, and so there is a provision in the Bible, that's the 25th chapter of Matthew, the 37th verse, where the Lord says, whatsoever you do unto the least of these, so also you do unto me. So for me, when I had to make some really, really hard decisions in Michigan about where to cut, I didn't cut Medicaid, for example, which of course is the safety net for pregnant women and children and people with disabilities and senior citizens. That to me is the population of people who needed an advocate. So for me, I want to see somebody who has, it doesn't have to be Christian, it has to be a core. And then I want somebody And I say this especially to people who are not in authorized positions of leadership, because as I'm sure you are learning that you can lead from anywhere on the totem pole of life, and that the most effective leaders are often those who are not authorized, like Rosa Parks and others. But in order to be effective, it means you have to act. And so passivity is the opposite of leadership. Passivity is a choice, but it is the opposite of leadership. You must move the ball. Unfortunately, the way we teach people often is where the professor speaks and students are passively listening. That's why a leadership class like the one you're in is so great, because it is a laboratory of leadership. So I wish that more classes and more of life was an opportunity for people in their own personal laboratories to exercise leadership.
Thank you very, very much. That was really fun.
Yeah. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. All right.